All right.
Let's go over the Gemara that we mentioned last week in Shabbos Kuf Yud Zayin Amid Beis. And the Gemara begins with Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba makes the statement that Chayav Adam livtzoa al shtei kikros b'Shabbos shenemar Lechem Mishna. Rav Kahana, the Gemara reports, would hold shtei kikros biyado umevarech aleim amotzi aval botzea bi'echad mehem. So it seems that whereas Rabbi Abba did the bitzia on both kikros lechem, Rav Kahana only held the two kikros lechem in his hands, but he did the bitzia on one of the two kikros. Then the Gemara continues with Rabbi Zera, and the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Zera botza akula sheruse. Rashi learns that Rabbi Zera cut off a very large piece of one of the two kikros, enough that would last for the entire Seudah. The Gemara then quotes the question, the objection of Rav Ashi. Chituch prusa gedola is called derech Rav Tanim. These are the way the gluttonous people cut off a very large section of the bread. How could Rabbi Zera do such a thing? And the answer that was given to Rav Ashi, or Rav Ashi himself gave the answer, was that Rabbi Zera did not do this the rest of the week. He only did this on Shabbos, and that proves that it was L'chvod Shabbos, but it was not Derech Rav Tanusa. The basic outline of the sugya, therefore, is Rabbi Abba, Rav Kahana, and Rabbi Zera, with the discussion back and forth of Rav Ashi about Rabbi Zera's minhag. Now, the last thing that we picked up on a week ago was the Rashba. I'd like to continue from the Rashba. The Rashba has a number of questions on Rashi, objections, and you'll see this on page 40. And we're going to now present the Rashba's understanding of the sugya. So if you happen to have the text in front of you, page 40, about 6 lines up from the bottom, the Rashba says that Rabbi Zera's statement that Ayabotzea Akula Sheruse for the entire Suda was a statement addressing Shabbos, Lechem Mishna on Shabbos. Not the way Rashi learns it, that it was the whole year long, at least in the Havamim. The Gemara thought that every day of the year, this is what he did. He would cut off a large piece. No. The Gemara understood, according to the Rashba, from the start, that Rabbi Zera had this minhag on Shabbos to cut a very large prusa from one of the kikros that would last for the entire meal. Now, let's read the Rashba carefully, because there's another very important point here. And the Rashba says, Akula Sherutza, says the Rashba, Rab Zera hayachotech es kol kikros shahayu munachos lefanav, which means that the Rashba understood there was a machlokes between Rabbi Zera and Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana, if you remember, would hold on to 2 kikros, but he would only cut one of the 2. And the Rashba understood that Rabbi Zera, in arguing with Rav Kahana, held that you have to cut all the kikros, not just one of the kikros. And now we understand what Ravina's problem was. What was the objection raised against Rabbi Zera? What Rabbi Zera was requiring was to cut 2 kikros simultaneously. The objection was not to the size of the section that he cut off. It was so large, as Rashi interprets it, that it looked like Rav Tanusa, but rather the fact that he cut 2 loaves of bread, 2 kikros lechem, bevasachas, simultaneously. Doesn't that look like Rav Tanusa? And on that, Rav Ashi answers, and now on the top of page 41, that since during the week he did not cut more than 1 loaf at a time, only on Shabbos he cut 2 loaves. Therefore, it was absolutely clear that this was done not out of a sense of Rav Tanusa of gluttony, but for Kavod Shabbos. The Yehuda, in his commentary on Moed called the Tzlach, defends Rashi against the Rashba, and he quotes the Rashbeitz. The Rashbeitz has a brisa that seems to support Rashi. Lo yifros es hamotzi mimakom arach el mimakom hakosher. Which part of the bread should you be cutting? And on this, in the brisa of Pirkei de Rav Azoi, of Ben Azai, Ravina asked the question, V'amichsei kirav tenusa. So therefore you see that the objection that was raised upon Reb Zera was about the way he would cut the bread from a certain part of the loaf of bread that looked like he was gluttonous. In any event, as we saw in the Rashba understood that Rabbi Zera was cutting all the kikros. And again, I reemphasize the language of the Rashba. Rabbi Zera yachotich es kol kikros shahayu munachos lefanav. And this understanding of the Rashba in Rabbi Zera becomes the source for the Gaon, the Vilna Gaon, quoted in Maisa Rav, that when one cuts the Lechem Mishna, he should cut both kikros, and if he has more than 2 kikros, he should cut all the kikros that are on the table. Because the Rashba says that that's exactly what Rabbi Zera did. Now we're going to raise a slightly different question, which is also addressed by the Vilna Gaon in Maisa Rav, and that is Suda Shlishis. Do we require Lechem Mishna 2 kikros shlemos for Suda Shlishit? And the Rashbeitz that we quoted earlier seems to indicate that even Shalashudis requires Bitzia on 2 kikros shlemos. Now, here we have something very interesting, because we cannot overemphasize the fundamental point that we started with about Shtei Lechem, about Lechem Mishna, namely that this is Zecher to the Nes of the Man, whereas every day 1 Omer quantity of Man would fall. On Erev Shabbos, 2 Omrim would fall, because on Shabbos, we were enjoined from collecting the Lechem Mishna, so we needed on Friday a double portion. Now, how does Shalashudis fit into this? Presumably, if they had a double portion, it would last for both Friday morning, Erev Shabbos, half an Omer for Friday night. They had another Omer, and that would last for Shabbos morning and for Shalashudis. There was no extra Nes involved in Shalashudis. the double portion of Omer that fell on Friday would supply their needs for all 3 seudos. We don't see any special miracle with regard to Suda Shlishit. And this Rashbait's quote of Balatosis, we don't have it. We only have it from the Rashbait's. The Rashbait's lived only 6 centuries ago. But at any rate, he says that we make a Zichron L'Nes of Lechem Mishna at every single Suda of Shabbos, meaning the entire Shabbos, from beginning to end, should be a vehicle for Kavod Shabbos, and the Kavod Shabbos is the miracle that took place in the Man on Erev Shabbos. Every opportunity that we have to be Machabed Shabbos through Kikros of Lechem is to be viewed and categorized as another opportunity to emphasize and to demonstrate the Kvod Shabbos of the great miracle that took place with a double portion of Man, the second Omer that fell on Friday, the Kvod Shabbos. It doesn't matter whether or not in each particular occasion we can fit in a Zecher L'Nes. Every occasion of a Suda, and there are 3 such occasions over the course of Shabbos, is an opportunity and generates an obligation to add the element of Kvod Shabbos of Shtei Lechem, of the Shtei Kikros Lechem. So that when we put Shtei Kikros Lechem on the table of the Suda Shabbos, it becomes a kiyum of Kvod Shabbos because of the Zeichel L'Nes. We don't need a Zeichel L'Nes every single time we put the Shtei Kikros. I don't have to go through the Zeichel L'Nes. The Zeichel L'Nes is only the backdrop of the Kavod Shabbos by eating Shtei Kikros Lechem, by setting up my meal on Shtei Kikros. And here, the Balei Tosfos that we don't know of, but are quoted by the Rashbaitz, quote a medrash. Now, this medrash I mentioned in the past has something to do with the number 2 with regard to Shabbos. Kol Iska Shel Shabbos Kofel. Everything that happened, anything that revolves around the Shabbos has to be double. And the first example, of course, is the Man. 2 Omrim of Man, a double portion of Omer, and Omer fell for Kavod Shabbos. That's already the number 2. The Torah says that the carbon of Shabbos should be Shnei Kvasim, again the number 2. And other examples, for example, the Torah will say in the punishment for Shabbos Motz Yumos, and in the midst of Shabbos Zochar V'Shomer, everything is double. So the Balei Tosfos say something really quite remarkable, that 2 Omrim fell on Yom Shishi, and what they did was they took a half an Omer, and this you'll see on the top of page 42, and they baked it as 1 lechem. And that they did on Friday morning. So what they're left with now, going into Shabbos, is 1.5 Omrim of Man, which they're going to bake as bread. Now, if you have 1.5 Omrim, then that will last you 1 kikar for Friday night, the first meal of Shabbos, another kikar for Friday morning, and a third for Shalosh Shunis. So you've covered all your 3 seudos with 1.5 Omrim as you enter into Shabbos. That's crystal clear. Very basic arithmetic here, right? So you had half an Omer for Friday morning, another half an Omer for Friday night, another half an Omer for Shabbos morning, and another half an Omer for Shabbos Shalosh Shunis. However, Since the Medrash says that every bracha of Shabbos is kaful, then the 1.5 omrim gets doubled, and now it becomes 3 omrim. Now 3 omrim will create 6 kikros of lechem, because all we need is a half an omer to produce 1 kikar. Now by doubling it, and that's the secret magic of Shabbos, we end up with 3 omrim going into Shabbos. 3 omrim will produce 6 kikros, which means that for each one of the 3 meals, we'll have 2 kikros. And this would seem to prove the shita of Rabbi Zera, the way the Rashba understood Rabbi Zera, that Rabbi Zera did the B'tzia on both kikros. And if he did so, presumably at every single of the 3 meals, then he had 2, 2, and 2. He needed 6 kikros in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna. And as we said before, the Gaon in Maisarav seems to have accepted the sheet of the Rashba in Rabbi Zera, and therefore we should be cutting 2 kikros at each one of the 3 meals for a total of 6 kikros. Now it's interesting. The Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Reish Ayin Daled, the Siman of Lechem Mishnah, quotes this minhag, the minhag of having 6 kikros, 2 at each one of the 3 meals, and cutting both kikros. And on the one hand, the Aruch HaShulchan justifies this minhag by saying that, look, you are now fulfilling the minhag of the Gaon, and before him, the shita of the Rashba in interpreting Rabbi Zera. And Rabbi Zera did the b'tzia on both kikros. But yet, says the Aruch HaShulchan, I don't understand this minhag. Why? Because it's true that the Gaon accepted the Rashba's interpretation of Rabbi Zera. But let's just look at the sugya itself. Rav Kahana only cut 1 kikar of lechem. And Rav Ashi, as we discussed at great length, was also opposed to cutting both kikros of lechem because he felt that would be derech Rav Tanusa. Now, as far as Rabbi Abba is concerned, we're not sure one way or the other. But if you assume, and we had a long discussion about this last week, that Rav Kahana disagreed with Rabbi Zera, with Rabbi Abba, who came before him, meaning that Rabbi Abba would require cutting both kikros, and Rav Kahana said, no, you should cut only one of the 2 kikros. Then it comes out that we have sort of a balance. But if you assume, like those Rishonim, that Rav Kahana was not arguing against Rabbi Abba, but rather he was explaining Rabbi Abba, that when Rabbi Abba said Chayev Adam lived Tzoa al Shtei Kikros, he didn't mean B'tzia, he meant Hamotzi Lechem in Aretz. Again, I'm not going to review what we discussed at great length last week and all the diyukim that support the view in the Rishonim that maintains that there was never an argument between Rav Kahana and Rav Zera and Rabbi Abba who came before him. So both Rav Kahana and Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Abba, before him, agree that you only cut one of the 2 kikros. Rav Ashi is a third Amora who insisted that you only cut one of the 2 kikros. It's only Rabbi Zera who cut both kikros. And why should we reflect our minhag according to Rav Zera, who's a das yachid, who's outvoted by 3 Amoraim in the sugya? That was the Aruch HaShulchan's problem. Now, the only thing that I find in this discussion that we presented up to this point is I'm missing an answer to the following question that gnaws at my mind. What is the Yesod HaPlugta between, we'll call it Rabbi Zera in the Rashba's frame of reference, and Rav Kahana. Why does Rav Kahana insist that we cut one of the two kikros? And Rabbi Zera insists that we cut both kikros. Again, according to the Rashba and the way the Gaon accepted it, and perhaps even the Minna. It would seem to me, Lefi Aniyas Daiti, that Rav Kahana was very interested in demonstrating the Nes. And by cutting one of the two kikros, leaving another kikar shlema, he is dramatizing the fact that we have another full Omer for tomorrow. We've taken the Omer of Friday night, initiating the first Suda of Shabbos by cutting one kikar. The Hamotzi that set up the Su'uda was on two kikros to indicate the two Omrim that came down for covered Shabbos. But let's put aside one of these two Omrim for tomorrow. If you would cut both kikros, so argues Rav Kahana, then in effect you're in a stira, you're in a contradiction. You started with Hamotzi Lechem in Aretz on two shlemos, which means that you are demonstrating the Nes of two shlemos. And then you're going to cut both shlemos? If you cut both shlemos, you haven't indicated that the Nes was meant to guarantee that tomorrow on Shabbos you'll have another Omer, and that's why there was another Omer that fell, an extra Omer on Friday. So the Friday Omer, which is the same as the Omer of every week, which would last for breakfast and dinner, Friday morning breakfast, and Friday night dinner on Shabbos, then it makes sense you cut the kikar. But leave the other kikar for Shabbos, daytime, to demonstrate the Nes. Otherwise, it's very odd. You started with a brach of Hamotzi on two kikros shlemos, and now you're left with 0 kikros shlemos. As if to say that Friday night, you've consumed both Omrim of man. So what then does Rav Zera hold in this approach? And the Gaon accepts Rav Zera cut both kikros. I believe that it goes back to the point that we made before. Rabbi Zera is differentiating between the backdrop for this mitzvah of Lechem Mishna and the mitzvah itself. The backdrop, meaning the cause behind the scenes that generates the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna, is the Nes. But now, the halacha formulates the mitzvah as a kiyum kavod. And that kiyum kavod, expressing itself in shtei kikrot, should now be fulfilled at every single meal. In fact, Rabbi Zera went even a step further, according to the Gaon. And if there were more than 2 kikros, you should be cutting more than 2 kikros. And all that is a kiyum of kvod Shabbos. Now again, here in the middle of page 42, he reiterates the fact that the Rashba understood the language of Reb Zera, achlu sherusa, akula sherusa, that Reb Zera would cut all of the kikros that were in front of him. And that's the source for the Minhag Gaon. Now, there's a very strange Rambam that leaves us kind of hanging. And he doesn't tell you exactly how we should fulfill the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna. This vague Rambam is in Perek Lamed Milchus Shabbos Halacha Tes, and you'll see it here on the bottom paragraph. The Rambam says, Livtsoa al shtei kikros. What does that mean? Should he be cutting both kikros? How much should he be cutting? The Rambam doesn't address any of these issues. However, Divrei Torah, Aniyim b'mkomam v'ashirim b'makom acher, what we should really focus our attention on is the Rambam in the 7th parak of Hilchos Brachos. And there the Rambam says, Chayav livtsoa al shtei kikros, and now he goes into detail. Notel shteyen biyado, ubotzea achas mehen. He only cuts one of them. Explicit, like Rav Kahana. Of course, you have to understand, he's taking a large slice from one of the two kikros. Why does the Rambam paskin like Rav Kahana? That's less of a question. But what bothers us, moreover, is why did the Rambam codify that in Hilchas Brachos and not in Hilchas Shabbos? But the Rambam adds a very important sentence in Hilchas Brachos that we quote. Says the Rambam, Ubishabbos, yesh lo livtsoa prusa gedola. This is already Rab Zera. The Rambam is combining Rav Kahana and Rab Zera. On the one hand, he accepts Rav Kahana, and you're only going to cut one of the kikros. On the other hand, he accepts Rabbi Zera the way Rashi understood Rabbi Zera, that he cuts a very large segment that would last presumably for the entire Suda. And this is the way the Shulchan Aruch paskins. As a general rule, he accepts the Rambam, and this is no exception. We're going to cut one of the two kikros according to the Shulchan Aruch, and we're going to cut a very large slice that would last for the entire meal. Now, honestly, I'm not 100% clear, perhaps you'll help me on this point, exactly how one is meant to fulfill the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna according to the Shulchan Aruch, according to the Rambam. What I do is I slice a challah into the appropriate number of slices. I'll go beyond the number of people at the table because people may want more than one slice. And we'll cut the entire kikar. But the impression you get from the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch is a little bit different. It sounds like you're cutting a large piece for the entire meal. Now, how do you do such a thing? The impression I get is, and laugh at me, that you cut off a small piece, and then what you have is, once you've cut, let's say 90% of the challah, as opposed to 10%, and there are some people who like that 10%, you give them that. My mother, may she rest in peace, loved that part of challah. And it's interesting, my mother-in-law, Tibara L'chaim, also loves that part of the challah. But what you're left with is a large segment for the rest of the meal. And now you're going to cut up that large segment. So at one moment in time, what you have in front of you is a large prusa to last for the entire Suud. That's the impression I get from the Shulchan Aruch. Now we get to the Bach. And this is on page 43. Again, in Siman Reish Ayin Daled, the Bach writes that we should combine the Shita of the Rashba with the Shita of Rashi. So what we should do is, we should accept Rabbi Zera the way the Rashba says, and therefore we should be botzea on both kikros, but at the same time, we should accept Rashi's understanding of Rabbi Zera. How did Rashi interpret Rabbi Zera? That we cut a large piece of the challah that would last for the entire meal. And according to the Bach, there's no problem and there's no contradiction in accepting both Rashi's interpretation of Rabbi Zera and the Rashba's interpretation of Rabbi Zera. On the one hand, we're going to cut both kikros, like the Rashba understood Rabbi Zera. On the other hand, we're going to cut a large section of each of these kikros, and we'll fulfill Rashi's interpretation of Rabbi Zera. And it's not mutually exclusive. There's no contradiction between the two. He mentions the Shita, or the Minhag at least, of the Ari, who had 12 kikros at each one of the meals, each of the three meals. And that seems to be a reflection of the Beis HaMikdash. We're now introducing another element in Lechem Mishna, and that's the Lechem Apanim. The Lechem Apanim on a weekly basis comprise 12 kikros to sections on the Shulchan of 6. Now, it's interesting. The language of the Ari, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, is Misadrin ala Shulchan Shtei Mesrei Kikros. We bring out to the table 12 kikros for each of the meals. Does that mean that if my wife is fulfilling the Arizal, that she has to bake 36 kikros? And she's an Eshes Chayil, but that's asking a little bit much. But I think if we read the Arizal carefully, he only says Misadrin ala Shulchan. Now you might ask me, well, if I want to be both a Grunik and at the same time a Arinik, then it's a little bit strange because the Gaon says we should be cutting into all the challahs, and that's how he understood based on the Rashba, the Shita of Rabbi Zera, and it's explicit in the Rashba. The Rashba is unquestionable. The language of the Rashba is Ayabotel Kol HaKikros. But yet, the Ari has us bringing out to the table 12 kikros. And it would seem that if you want to combine both the Ari and the Vilna Gaon, the Ari, by the way, was probably 150 years, maybe even about 150 years before the Gaon, then your wife is going to have to bake 36 kikros of Lechem. Joe?
I just want the idea of cutting both kikros. Does nobody say that maybe the idea is that we have them one on top of the other, and you're not sure exactly which one you're supposed to use, so you cut both to not to be mizazel, not to, and that's the idea. So
any one of the kikros.
Right, you don't know which one to do, so you cut them both bevasachas, and that way. And it's got nothing to do with whatever other bread is at the table. I mean, I understand.
So I would say to you the following, that if you're doing it that way, that's fine. But it's hard for me to accept that Rabbi Zera had that in mind. That Rabbi Zera knew about all these Kabbalistic, again, it's possible. But when you read a Gemara, and Rabbi Zera says, according to the Rashba's interpretation, that Akula Sudasa, the Gemara even accused him of Rav Tenusa. I don't think you want to get into sfekas about which of the two kikros. He seems to be saying that that's the kiyum of Kavod Shabbos, because basically you're announcing that there was a great miracle of Omer, of the man, and the miracle took place with two kikros. So what are you going to do? You're just going to put them on the table? You're not going to cut into them? The bitzia, I should say, is part of the mitzvah of the Shtei Lechem. Just to put it on the table, that's no kunz. We're not decorating our table, are we? We want to cut into the two lechamim. But again, I'm not rejecting, Joe, what you're saying. I think there could be another kavanah that you might want to have in mind when you cut both kikros. Although I think I don't know how you can engineer it exactly, because Lamaisa, the Bali Kabbalah would like you to cut the bottom kikar at night and the top kikar during the day. I don't know if you cut them both at the same time, you might be yotzes charab efseda. You might be losing more than you gain. But maybe you want to cut the bottom one at night and then cut the top one. That would make sense. And have in mind that you want to reach out to both kikros and have them both participate in the mitzvah of Shtei Lechem, of kikros. I'm just
thinking with if you're cutting the 12, how much French toast can you make Sunday morning?
Right. That's why I would tell you that I don't believe that we should combine the Gon and the Arizal. I think we should separate the two. Again, I may be dead wrong about this, but my intuition tells me that if you're going with the Arizal, you're not going to be cutting 12 kickers. That's not what he's requiring. If you're going with the Gon, he's outspoken about that. You're going to cut every last kicker. But now if my diuk in the Arizal is correct, and the Arizal was never asking us to eat from 12 kikros, then I go back to my original question: what point is there to decorate the shulchan? Do you understand my question? Meaning, if we go with the Shita of the Rajba at least, and we want to do the Betzia on the Shtei Kikros of Lechem, and that's the Kiyum of Kavod Shabbos. Very nice that you brought 12 Kikros to the table, but if the Ari is not asking you to cut into them, and basically 10 out of the 12 you can reserve for tomorrow, what's the point in bringing them out to the table? So here I'd like to quote the Rashbam at the beginning of Arvei Psachim, who in turn quotes the Sheiltos of Rabbi Chai Gon. This is a very, very famous Sheiltos quoted by the Rashbam for those who come from a Yeki background. You may notice, or maybe you have that minhag in your family, that the German Jews will wash Netilas Yadayim before Kiddush. What's it all about? If you look at the Shiltos quoted by the Rashbam, he emphasizes Havas halechem el hashulchan, meaning, if you're going to recite Kiddush before Netilas Yadayim, which is the most common minhag, then what happens is that you want to set up your shulchan as a makom seuda because of the principle ein kiddush el b'makom seuda. Therefore, you're going to bring out the kikros before kiddush. The Shiltos doesn't buy into that, because if you're bringing out the kikros before kiddush, you are forfeiting a kiyum mitzvah. And what is that kiyum mitzvah? The kiyum mitzvah is havoy al shulchan, to bring the kikros out to the shulchan. If you've already recited kiddush, and now you have on the table your shtei lechem, now since you've already washed netilas yadayim and you don't need a hefsek between kiddush and shtei lechem, you've got the shtei lechem right there in front of you, and you brought the shtei lechem out onto the table for the specific purpose of Kavod Shabbos.
Lechem upon meaning.
Again, I call it Shtei Lechem, meaning Lechem Mishna, and it's all a reflection, according to the Arizal, of Zecher Le Lechem Haponim. But again, what I want to derive from the Shiltos is that there's a halach of Hava El HaShulchan, and we sacrifice and forfeit that kiyum of Hava El HaShulchan, that the table should be adorned, if I can use that term, with Lechem Mishna as part of Kavod Shabbos. And that could not be fulfilled if we've already brought out the Shtei Lechem, or call it the Lechem Mishna, before I recited Kiddush, which is exactly what we do. There's no significance in setting up the Lechem Mishnah on the table if I haven't yet recited Kiddush. And the reason for that is because I'm just simply setting up my Suda. I need a Suda, so I put the Shtei Lechem, the Lechem Mishnah, on the table. But what I'm forfeiting, according to the Shita of the Shiltos, is Hava El HaShulchan. The Hava El HaShulchan should be after Kiddush, because now the Hava El HaShulchan is a kiyum of Kavod Shabbos. And I'm just borrowing one concept, I'm not equating it, from the Shiltos, that if there's a kiyum of Hava El HaShulchan and actually bringing the lechem out to the table, then I can begin to understand that if I want to add another element into my Shtei Lechem of a zecher to the Lechem Aponim, so just like there was a shulchan in the Heichal, and it was adorned by the Lechem, and the Kohen would now bring the Lechem and replace last week's lechem with this week's lechem on the shulchan, so now the aval shulchan becomes part and parcel of the mitzvah itself. And now when I bring out 12 kikros according to the Ari, bringing it out to the table, I now have injected into my covered Shabbos of aval shulchan ala the shiltos the element of zeichel and migdash, of adorning the shulchan like the shulchan in the Beis HaMikdash with 12 kikros. Two more questions. Number one, on Yontif, is there a requirement of Lechem Mishna on Yontif? And the Rishonim say yes. We need Shtei Lechem on Yontif as well. Why? And the answer is because even though the Torah only explicitly mentions the miracle of man on Yom HaShishi, on Friday, but nevertheless, every Erev Yontif, two portions, a double portion of man had to fall from Shemayim. As the Rosh and the Rif point out, we could not collect the man on Yontif, and therefore there was no man on Yontif. There had to be a double portion of man on Erev Yontif. Now, I'm not exactly sure why they couldn't collect the man on Yontif. I don't believe it's a problem of Meleches Hotzah, because we paskin ein Hotzah b'Yontif, and it would certainly be Litzarech Ochel Nefesh, but rather I believe that this is what the Torah wanted to impress upon us, that as we go into a Yom Kadosh, a sanctified day, we have everything prepared before the day. And we want to make sure we have the Omer, the extra Omer for Yontif on Erev Yontif. It's not a Friday necessarily, but the man fell down as a double portion on Erev Yontif. Question number two. What about Yom Kippur? On Yom Kippur, was there a double portion of man that fell on Erev Yom Kippur? I thought maybe there was in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Achila on Erev Yom Kippur. But no, I'm talking about for the benefit of Yom Kippur. And the answer is no. There's no Lechem Mishna. There's no Achila on Yom Kippur. There's no reason why a miracle would happen unnecessarily. And on Erev Yom Kippur, there should be a double portion of man falling an extra Omer for Yom Kippur. We didn't eat anything on Yom Kippur, not even man. And therefore, the Chayodim Paskins, you'll see it on the bottom of page 43, that there's no Lechem Mishna on Yom Kippur. Why are you telling me that? The answer is we're talking about a Chole, Sheyesh Bo Sakana. He's got to eat a meal on Yom Kippur. We'll soon see that in benching, he's going to add Yalaviyovo. But there's no Lechem Mishna on the table. Now, again, I have no problem with the Chayodim, because if there was no Nes on Erev Yom Kippur, a double portion of the Omer of Man, then there's no Chiv, there's no Machayev of Zeichel and Nes, in this case of a Choleh who's eating his meal on Yom Kippur. But what I do have a problem is, and here I think the poskim in the aftermath of the following the footsteps of the Chayodim went a little too far. What happens if Shabbos and Yom Kippur coincide? And he's a Choleh. He will recite both Yalaviyovo and Ritzei and benching. He should certainly be required Lechem Mishnah because it's Shabbos. Okay, it's Yom Kippur, so he wouldn't normally eat. He's a Choleh and he's allowed to eat. He's obligated to eat. Why not allow him to fulfill the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah on Shabbos? Yom Kippur per se, without Shabbos, there's no Lechem Mishnah. I can accept that. But let Shabbos generate a chiyuv of Lechem Mishnah. Normally, if it was Shabbos and Yom Kippur, I don't have this issue. There's no Lechem Mishnah and there's no Suda on Shabbos of Yom Kippur. But if he's a Choleh, he's eating a Suda on Yom Kippur, it's a Suda Shabbos. Why shouldn't he have Lechem Mishnah? And that's the question that I have. I believe that there's a fundamental answer to this question. What happens when Yom Kippur coincides with Shabbos? Or say it the other way around, if you like, Shabbos coincides with Yom Kippur. Do we have one Kedusha or two Kedushas? I'll prove to you that we have two independent Kedushas. Because in benching, he's going to recite Ritzei, which is generated by Kedusha Shabbos. He will recite Yalav Yovo, which is generated by Kedushas Yom Kippur. That happens to be an overlap of two Kedushos in one day, 1 24-hour period, but they're not mutually exclusive. We have the Kedusha of Shabbos and the Kedusha of Yom Kippur, two separate independent Kedushos, and he's got to fulfill the Azkara for each one of these Kedushos individually. Shtei Lechem is different. Shtei Lechem is Zecher L'Nes, and now we're going very far out. We're really going out on a limb. If there's no Zecher L'Nes, then there's no Shtei Lechem. It could be that the takon of Shtei Lechem goes beyond Zecher L'Nes, as we said when we discussed about Shalosh Shudas, that you'd require Shtei Kikros in Shalosh Shudas. That's not Zecher L'Nes. That is already a kiyum of Kvod Shabbos. And we discussed the concept of Havoil HaShulchan as a Kvod Shabbos. Lechem Mishna takes on multi-dimensional kiyumim within the framework of Kvod Shabbos. That I agree. But you must have the mechayev of Zecher L'Nes. In the absence of Zecher L'Nes, you would not even get to first base and formulate a takana of Lechem Mishna as a kiyum of Kavod Shabbos. So therefore, in a situation in which Shabbos and Yom Kippur overlap, there's no Zecher L'Nes. There was no Lechem Mishna that fell on that Friday. So I'm going to test you now. Quiz question for those who take IQ tests, right? On what Friday would there be no Lechem Mishna, 2 Omrim of man falling from Shemayim? The answer is on a Friday that's Yom Kippur. If Friday is Yom Kippur, then there's no double. Well, I'm sorry. I said if Friday is Yom Kippur. What I meant to say was
Erev Kippur.
If Friday is Erev Yom Kippur, if Shabbos is Yom Kippur, that Friday there was no double portion of Omer. The Omer didn't fall as a nest for the benefit of a Cholen. I don't know if that's true or not true.
And what did they have for Mitzvah Yom Kippur? Where did they get Mitzvah Yom Kippur food?
Okay, let's go slowly. So again, what happens is the following. The miracle of Erev Shabbos would guarantee the extra Omer for the 2 meals of Shabbos. Bobby's asking an intelligent question about Motzi Shabbos. But let's talk about the 2 meals of Shabbos. We're used to eating Malava Malka. But Malava Malka is a later institution. And if you're above a chassid, then of course we have to eat Malava Malka. But I'm just saying, we ate 2 meals a day. There had to be a separate Omer that fell on Friday to supply me with 2 meals on Shabbos. Wait, go slowly. Just 1 second. Now, what happens in a case that Shabbos is Yom Kippur? Did a miracle have to happen to supply me with 2 meals on that Shabbos? Did I need Lechem Mishna, meaning 2 Omrim of man, to fall on Friday so that I'd have an extra Omer which I could divide into 2 meals on Shabbos? Well, maybe there should have been a miracle for the sake of a Chola. Maybe there was a miracle for the sake of a Chola, but there was no blanket universal miracle to supply another Omer for 2 meals of Shabbos if Shabbos was Yom Kippur. Now you might ask, but it's Shabbos today. Why shouldn't I be eating Shtei Lechem if I'm a Chola and I have to eat on Yom Kippur? But the answer is that the original Machayev, if we go back to the initiation of Lechem Mishna, is the Nes. Go ahead, Bobby. I just wanted to get that mathematics.
Oh, but in other words, on Friday morning, if it's Erev Yom Kippur, they're going to eat in the morning. They're going to eat before Yom Kippur.
Correct.
You have to eat
They'll have their
Suda
two foods.
Suda before Yom Kippur.
Right.
Okay, where are they going to get food for after Yom Kippur?
Again, what I think in that case,
Forget about Malava Malka. I'm talking about just eat. They have to break their fast. Where are they going to have food if they don't have an extra portion, or at least half a portion?
You're saying for when it's on Friday? When
yeah, he's saying that if Yom Kippur's on Shabbos, we have a technical problem here.
They break your fast. Yeah.
Now, what are you going to eat after Yom Kippur? Because all they had was Omer. They didn't have any other, they didn't produce anything in the midbar.
Well,
I don't
the
know.
Gemara says they,
I
Gemara
think
says they
that's
bought stuff
fair.
from traveling salesmen.
Say it again, David.
The Gemara says they bought stuff from traveling salesmen.
Ah,
Because I'll tell you why the Gemara says it. Because the Gemara says, it says in Devarim, "V'yod tiyel chal zeinecha," for the bathroom, right? So the question is, reading mother, there's no waste product. Nobody needs a bathroom anyway. So what's shutting the tzivui? The answer is because they bought food from traveling salespeople.
maybe he's right. I don't know. That requires more study. But again, I think the premise that the Omer, the extra Omer, the second Omer that fell on Friday was for the 2 meals of Shabbos. I think that's a solid premise.
Yeah.
And maybe that
Anyway,
would understand the
I'd also-
because the Chayyim is saying, okay, there's no Lechem Mishna on Yom Kippur. That I understand. Versteht's. But why is there no Lechem Mishna when Shabbos coincides with Yom Kippur? So you're going to tell me, well, we merged the two Kedushos into one. That's not so. Every Kedusha generates its own mitzvahs, and Shabbos must be recognized, and I need Lechem Mishna as a kiyum of Shabbos. Why do I completely, dissolve that mitzvah of Lechem Mishna of Shabbos simply because it's Yom Kippur? And I thought that maybe the answer to this question, he doesn't address this question, could be that there was no ness in such a case back in the midbar.
Also, I just wanted to challenge, I don't know why the Rishonim take it on as such a davar pashut that Yontiv would have Lechem Mishnah. In other words, Yontiv, you're allowed to prepare food. Is there a idea that one should prepare his Yontiv food before Yontiv?
Right.
There is,
View. That's the covenant that we have for Yontif, that we've already prepared our meals for Yontif before we enter into the Chag.
So that's enough to justify to say that we have with that they had two portions of man, because the Torah certainly doesn't say that. The Torah doesn't allude
I
to
have
that.
it here in the Rush, which is Psachim Perek Yud, and in the Rif, which is also his super commentary on Psachim. If you have a chance, you'll look in the original source and see if they go into
Yes,
detail.
I see it there.
The last piece, and this ends that discussion of Lechem Mishnah, and then I want to introduce our next topic, is on page 44. And this is what I call a Hasidish piece. It is so Hasidish that it may have even passed the red line for Hasidic. That's how Hasidish is. And he says that Lechem Mishnah has an impact on the very shlema that's in front of you for Lechem Mishnah. The Lechem Mishnah itself is endowed with a certain power, a magical power, because of the special sanctity of the Lechem Mishnah replacing the man. The man was miraculous, and now the Lechem Mishnah that you have on your table on Friday night is miraculous. How so? Because you lit your Shabbos candles, and the psilos, the wicks, unfortunately started drooping, and the light is flickering. So what do? So there's a sefer called the Sefer Mat'amim, which you'll see here quoted in number 55, written by one of the great Hasidic poskim, and he writes that you take the Lechem Mishnah and you bring it close to the lights and see what happens. And all of a sudden, the wicks It's like a sound of music. The wicks all of a sudden rise up from the dead, and you fix your candles, your Neiros Shabbos. Okay, the Stipler says it's Derech HaMori to do such a thing. But in any event, Rabbi Mirsky Shlita, whose grandfather was murdered by the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, tells a story that he heard from his father. Now, Rabbi Mirsky, again, lives up the block here. So we're getting a story secondhand. You know, this is not like a Maisa Shahoya from, from the Baal Shem. And he says that his father tells the following story. They were sitting at the table at the Suda Shabbos on Friday night, and the candles started drooping, and the wicks started bending over in one direction. So Rav Mirsky's grandfather, Haredi HaKadosh Baruch Hu should Yikom Domo, Hashem Yikom Domo, the grandfather says to Rav Mirsky's father, who passed away not long ago, just bring the kikros of Lechem. And Rav Mirsky's father tells Rav Yitzchak Mirsky, the author of this work that we're studying, that they brought the kikros of Lechem and they put it on one side of the candelabra, and the wicks that were leaning towards the other side started leaning towards this side. So they took the Lechem Mishna and they put it on the other side. And then the wicks started going that way until they finally juggled it in such a way that the wicks stood up straight. And this is what happened at the table of Rav Mirsky's grandfather, Hashem Yikom Dom. It's up to you guys. How Hasidish can you be? Most of us don't even bother with these kinds of wicks anymore. They're passé. But if you have the old-fashioned wicks, try it one time. But you're going to have to wait until you have an occasion when the wicks start drooping down. All right.
Bruce, before you move on from Lechem Mishnah, if I could ask a quick question, since we're on the subject of Lechem Mishnah.
Right.
So just in terms of some of the minhagim, so we cover the challah so that it's not embarrassed from the wine.
Yeah.
And why do we cover on the bottom?
Because the Torah says about the man that there were two shichvos. There was one underneath and one on top, and that protected the man.
And then in terms of you cut on the at night, you put the top one and you cut the bottom one, unless you're doing like cutting both of them, but you cut the bottom one, and in the morning they say you cut the top one. Again, what's is
that universal?
Yeah, that has to do with what's called Zachar v'Shamar. Now, Friday night is the Bechina of Shamar, and Shabbos morning is the Bechina of Zachar. Now, Friday night is Nekeva, and there are many indications. You'll take a look in the Tefillah, and in the Nusach HaTefillah, we say Yanuchu Va in the feminine on Friday night. And the reason for that, again, I'm just giving you on a scratch the surface level, is because the Shabbos is passive on Friday night. And we sanctify the Shabbos. The Shabbos, therefore, is in a keva, which represents passivity. And in the structure, the chalas is on the bottom. Again, I'm not going into the laws of tznius over here, in terms of tashmish hamita. You could have him on top and her on top. But generally speaking, if he's on top, I don't want to go into too much detail here, then the Zachar is going to be on top. But we want to emphasize that Friday night is the aspect, the dimension of Shabbos as a nekeva. Therefore, we're going to cut the bottom chal. Now, once we've recited Kiddush on Friday night, and we ate the Suda, and we sanctified the Shabbos, now the Shabbos picks up that Kiddusha and is elevated to the level of an active Mekadesh. We were the Makadesh on Friday night. The Shabbos is the Makadesh on Shabbos day. And therefore the Shabbos becomes the Bechina of Zocha. It's no longer passive, but it's active. The ultimate integration of both these dimensions of Shabbos is called Yemos HaMashiach or Me'ein Olam Haba, and that's the Bechina of Mincha. And that's why it's in Tfilas Mincha, you'll see not V'yanuchu Va of Friday night, nor V'yanuchu Vo of Shabbos morning, but Yanuchu Vam, which is the ultimate integration of these two dimensions of Shabbos.
I have a question. Before you go further, one last thing. This Hava.
We're not going to really go further. I'm just going to say a word or two about where we're going from here. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question. I think it's Hava and why wash for Kiddush? Like either way, you're bringing the challahs onto your table, right? It's like what's the point of washing first?
If you wash first, then immediately after Kiddush, you bring the Lechem Mishna out to the table and you cut the Lechem Mishna without delay. So we want to get the Netilas Yadayim out of the way, and then we want to bring out the Lechem Mishna after Kiddush. If you bring the Lechem Mishna to the table before Kiddush, mehechatesi, that you're bringing it for the sake of Kiddush Shabbos. Once you've recited Kiddush, then you've sanctified the day. Now you bring out the Lechem Mishna, and that Havoil HaShulchan is a kiyum of Kavod Shabbos.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking is I've seen people who bring out the Lechem and wash in advance because they claim it's a hefsek or something to wash in the middle. But really, you should bring out the bread after you say Kiddush, not before.
Correct. And that's not a hefsek, because Adarabah, that's a kiyum mitzvah of Havoil HaShulchan, especially if you consider the possibility that Lechem Mishna, according to the Arizal, is also zecher to the Beis HaMikdash. So you're adorning your shulchan with a mice of Havoil HaShulchan. You set up the shulchan as a shulchan Shabbos with Kiddush. Now you have a kiyum of Havoil HaShulchan, and that enhances your Kavod Shabbos. And now immediately after Kiddush, you cut the challahs without delay, no interruption with Netilas.
You're saying that the challahs should not be on the table when you're saying Kiddush.
Exactly.
No,
Now the question is, are you forfeiting another kiyum of Ein Kiddush al Mokom Suda? So then we're going to have to say that you're making Kiddush al Yayin, and the Revius Yayin itself is a Mokom Suda. Like, for example, I don't know if in your parts of the world, I'm trying to remember from my days back in Toronto, but I believe that at Kiddush, they don't have challahs on the table in the morning. Am I right? But that's not a kasha, by the way, because I don't know if they have wine on the table on Shabbos. Or it depends whether the Hungarians took over or the Polish. I don't know what goes on in Clinton Park these days. But probably you're making Kiddush on Schnapps. Now, Kiddush on Schnapps, you really have to be a chassid for that, because if you're a Litvak, you're in trouble. I know, Bobby, you learned in Litvish yeshivas, you must have an issue about whether to make Kiddush on Schnapps on Shabbos.
Well, let's be clear. I'm not from Hasidic background. It's my wife's family.
I thought your father was Hungarian.
He's Hungarian, but he was Ashkenaz.
He was the Ashkenazic Hungarian.
Yeah. But you know,
you married into a Hasidic family.
As a in the Hasidic world, if you're married in, you become part of the So as a descendant of the Divrei Chaim, I figured that we have enough heter to make Kiddush on Schnapps.
But do me a favor, don't make Kiddush on too much Schnapps, because you might get a split in the community. But what I mean to say is that I married a Hasidic girl, and my shver during his entire life with me as a son-in-law was trying to get me to wear a gartel. Oh. And it wasn't like I was mezalzel. I said, Shver, take a look, I'm wearing a gartel. He never accepted that, by the way, but we were friends anyway. Next week in Mishna, I want to start with you a new topic, also from Rav Mirsky. And this is the Hegionei Halacha. If you ever find a copy of the Hegionei Halacha somewhere in the city of Toronto, I'll pay for it. Because I'm not a good photographer, and I don't have the time to take these photographs. This week I lucked out because I told David that just send out the same or just tell the people they have last week's. Anyway, in the first volume of Hegyonei Halacha, he's got a piece on tefillah. Again, the first volume is dedicated to the month of Elul and Tishrei. And of course, there's chunks here about tefillah during Elul, the David Hashem Ori and Shofar and whatnot. But there's one section here that although it's published in the first volume, which deals with Chodesh Elul, it is universal, it applies to the whole year, and that's tefillah. And again, if you ever, in your parts of the world, maybe go on Bathurst, what was the name of the bookstore? I forgot.
Miriam's.
Miriam's.
What's it called?
Miriam's is one.
Oh, Miriam's.
Miriam's.
That doesn't sound
Negev.
familiar. Does that date back
Negev.
to my time?
Negev, Farm Warehouse.
Negev, yeah. What was the two brothers Kaplan? One of them, I was in Toronto.
Morty and Arthur.
Yeah, when he passed away. I had met him a few times before he passed away. Anyway, if you get a hold of a good library, I mean a good Svarim store in Toronto, and you can get the Hegyonei Halacha, it would save me a lot of hassle. Like the Big Day Chamudos that we once spoke about. By the way, I still don't own a copy of the Big Day Chamudos. And it might become...
I'll speak to my son in Lakewood.
See if you can get, well, I don't know. Yeah, I hope they have Hegyonei Halacha. If they're logical, they'll have the Hegyonei Halacha, but not everything goes by logic. Anyway, by the way, on the side, Corona issues might, chas v'shalom, come back into mode because of this Indian business. And our new prime minister made a statement yesterday that if the numbers continue at 100 testing positive a day, we're going to start wearing masks. And wearing masks is the beginning of an avalanche. Now, honestly, I don't know how I'm going to get used to wearing a mask. I can't even imagine it. I have nightmares from this, you know. But be that as it may,
Are they feeling that it's resistant even to the vaccines?
No, they're not going that far, but they're claiming that a COVID recovery case might not be protected, or someone who never had COVID and was not inoculated and so forth, that could create an avalanche. And I hope it won't come to that. I mean, I saw in my shul today here in Har Nof that the most staunch advocates of wearing masks, who took off their masks only recently. I mean, we took off our masks months ago, but they finally took off their mask about 6 weeks ago. He still didn't have his mask on today.
Is there still a strong?
So that's good news. But what's going to be on Shabbos, I don't know. You know.
Is there still a strong anti-vaccination lobby in the Haredi world there?
I don't, honestly, Bobby, again, I may be very naive here, but I don't think it's a Haredi shtick. I think it's a health freak shtick. And that crosses all political lines. Meaning I have members of my, close members of my family who did not want to be vaccinated because they were afraid of what the vaccination could do. They're big shots because they have antibodies, either because they had COVID or they were exposed to people who had COVID.
Right.
But I don't know. You might be right and I'm wrong, but I don't think that we should really attribute Harediism to anti-vax. Maybe it's more common amongst Haredim. I don't know.
In Lakewood, it seems to be definitely there's some of the poskim there and whatever are encouraging people not to get vaccinated.
Yep.
So that's.
I think we discussed in our Wednesday Shia way back when pregnant women or nursing women, there were categories, but now you're saying it goes beyond that.
Yeah.
We've been saying that for a long time in Lakewood. All the big poskim. They put out a thing.
Just one word about where we would like. So I mentioned to you this volume, and if you could possibly get a hold of it, and if you could ship the Big Day Chamudos, I'll pay for it to Israel so I could have a copy of the Big Day Chamudos. In any event, there's a section here about tefillah, the mitzvah of prayer, that goes beyond El. It's not, it happens to be here that he integrated it into the section for Chodesh El. It's a little bit premature for El. We're holding the middle of Tammuz, so we still have 6 weeks at least, Tammuz and Av, till we get to El. So we'll come back to this section in Mirz Hashem when we get to El, but the section on Tefillah, which begins on page 6, is fascinating. And he has here a machlokas between Reb Chaim, Brisker, and the Chazon Ish. Very fascinating machlokas, which I'd like to cover with you next week. And we'll see where we go from there. I was looking in volume 3, which takes you up to, but not including Chodesh Elul, and I was hoping he would have a discussion about Shivasa B'Tammuz, about Tisha B'Av, but so far I haven't found it. He has one section that's dedicated to the Beis HaMikdash and the Churban Beis HaMikdash. So B'li Neder, I'm going to take a look at that, and maybe we'll study that for Tisha B'Av. But in the meantime, just one word, it's not an advertising word. I'm finding a certain, I'm at home, if I could say that, with the Hegdonei Haloch. I like his style. I think he's makif. And at the same time, he leaves me a little bit of room to say my own. And without further ado, I wish you all a great week. Shkoi.
For Verzon, do you have one more minute?
Sure, I'll just shut off this recording.